Welcome to the Trailblazers. I'm Perry Rarick, your host and chief editor of Follow Your Buyer. The purpose of this interview series is to share with you interesting discussions I have with trailblazing thought leaders. They're innovative, thought-provoking. They challenge the status quo, they embrace difficulty, and they have served as vanguards for positive transformation, and they join me here. Our trailblazer guest today is Adam Smartschan. He is the Chief Strategic Officer at Altitude Marketing. However, I learned a better way to describe his role is that he is the Chief Keeping Things Moving Forward Officer. I love that description. Adam helps Altitude's clients create memorable customer experiences and drive growth through strategic thinking and the smart use of technology. He, and I would add the entire Altitude team, is really good at this. They excel in gaining a deep understanding of their clients and their industry, then turning that turning that information into actionable, sustainable, strategic plans. He's an award-winning writer and editor by trade in a former life. He now heads Altitude's strategic marketing and branding efforts. He specializes in data analytics, search engine optimization, digital advertising strategy, conversion rate optimization, and technical integrations. In his role, he is responsible for deploying solutions for clients that are effective, cost-efficient, and working in concert with one another. He holds numerous industry certifications, and he's a frequent speaker on B2B marketing strategy and SEO topics. He's a graduate of Northeastern University, and after graduating, he began his career at newspaper and media outlets, including stops at the Morning Call, the Cape Cod Times, and the Metro chain. Shout out to those publications. And he's here today to speak about artificial intelligence, and more specifically, ChatGPT and technologies like it. Welcome, Adam. It's really great to have you here.
Thank you so much, Perry. I quite literally could not have said that better myself. I appreciate it.
Well, we're delighted to have you because we've had this planned for a couple of weeks, and I'm excited about it the whole time. So I've really been looking forward to this. So everyone is buzzing about artificial intelligence. And I think you would agree that that much of that is not exactly grounded in fact. And so ChatGPT, and when I say that, I mean, the whole family of technologies like it as well. They have marketers and content creators excited and at the same time nervous. Like, is this going to take my role? Am I going to lose a job? So can you give us just a quick, like a brief ChatGPT 101. What is this?
Absolutely. So ChatGPT is really the standard bearer of this whole group of generative AI products or generative AI solutions. And when I say generative, what I mean is they are able to create content, to create output in a human-like form. Now, AI, in some senses, isn't new whatsoever, right? You could argue it's been around for the better part of a century, depending on your definition, right? So for me, in general, with AI, I tend to define it as the robotic execution of manual data-driven tasks. And when you break it out that way, that there's a million things you could consider AI. What changed with ChatGPT were a couple of things. Number one was the interface, right? ChatGPT is meant to act like a chatbot. You almost, quote unquote, converse with it the way you'd converse with a human being. So there aren't, code elements necessary to interface with it. You don't have to use any kind of arcane front end or user interface. You simply type like you would talk to a human. The other thing with ChatGPT, and increasingly with new versions of ChatGPT, is its ability to create, like I said before, human-sounding content. And the way it does that is really all probability. Effectively, what ChatGPT does is predicts the most likely next language element based on its training data. So it was given gigabytes upon gigabytes upon gigabytes of text. The models that do images were trained on images. The models that do video were trained on video. And they're making predictions on the fly. So it's not really understanding what you're saying. It's not really understanding even what it's saying. What it is doing is saying that, okay, it seems like I'm being asked to describe a dog. What do I know about dogs? Dogs are furry, right? Dogs have tails. Dogs are, loving toward humans, though one of my dogs would very much differ with that. It's always trying to predict that next element. Now, the upshot of that is it very much feels like human output, right? It's giving you something that is meant to sound human. There are certainly downsides to that we'll get into as well. But the big picture is, can you use ChatGPT to create something that feels like it was done by a human that ultimately has some human input way back when it was initially trained? The answer there is absolutely yes.
So I love the description you emphasized, human-like.
Yeah.
That's different than human.
Mhm.
And so we may get into that a little bit more, but that's a great differentiator. Anything else? What does that mean?
With ChatGPT, again, is that interface, and it's that way that you interact with it, right? That chatbot style format really changed everything. Is again, we've had AI tools, we've had machine learning tools available to us on some level for many years. We've had these large language models and these content generators available to us for really the better part of a decade now. They weren't very capable, and it was way more difficult in the past to actually work with them. You'd have to build them in deep into an application. You'd have to use APIs. It was kind of this arcane knowledge that only a certain small amount of people could get to. What changed with ChatGPT in late 22 was the fact that anybody could fire up their browser. They could go to a URL at openai.com. They could type a question in, and they could get output. Right? They could paste in text and say, summarize this, and get a summary. And that was very quickly baked into any number of other applications, right? So something like Zoom, which we're on now, is very capable of summarizing your conversation using the exact same technology. And again, your ability as an everyday user, as opposed to a coder, to get to that has never been simpler, right? You can access that really easy. Something like Otter, which I use all the time, records a conversation, transcribes a conversation, and then uses the same tech to summarize and make it queryable. So I can ask questions of that conversation very much like I'm talking to a human being. Hey, Otter, what did Perry want to know from this interview? Hey, Otter, what were the action items out of this? It's all that same technology that again, is able to intake large amounts of information, use its natural language processing abilities to get to an extent what folks are talking about and summarize it. When we talk about human-like, the big difference is, again, that a large language model, like what ChatGPT is based on, doesn't actually know anything. It's all probability and it's all statistics. It has no idea when it's describing a dog what it's talking about. What it knows is, in general, these are the words that are used to describe dogs, and it's heard it hundreds or thousands or millions of times and is able to synthesize that and give you the most likely answer. What AI, as we know it right now, this generative AI boom, does, again, is statistics. What it does not have is a giant base of knowledge that is real in the way knowledge is real to you or knowledge is real to me. We can make connections very differently than a computer can. That said, a computer can much more easily synthesize massive amounts of information than we can. So two very different things. But when you put this ChatGPT interface on it, that again feels like you're texting with a friend almost, you're trained and your brain kind of understands it like it's a human interaction because it feels like it and it seems like it and it's kind of like it, but the underpinnings are really wildly different than the way a brain works.
Awesome explanation. That I feel like the lights just came on for me. You know, I've read a lot about this, heard a lot about it, but you describe it, you're a consummate marketer. You've simplified the complex. So thank you very much for that explanation. I want to shift gears a little bit to its use, to its employment, and think about B2B solution providers, the marketing teams, the marketing leaders, and how they would use this, the employment of it. So what advice do you have? How can it be used?
So there's really two rules that we try to live by here at Altitude. Number one is to always have guide rails and guardrails around where we're using generative AI. You can't just bake it willy-nilly into a process. At some point we might go there, we might use this tool. You really have to understand what it's capable of and what it's not capable of. And when we talk about capability, I like to describe it as giving the mean of humanity. So going back to that concept of how these models were trained, right? Gigabytes upon gigabytes upon gigabytes of text. An AI model, a large language model, is not able to sort through that information, make a value judgment, and say that is the correct answer. What it's able to do is give you the average answer. It's heard a lot about, again, a dog, right? It's heard a lot about the pharmaceutical industry. It can't be the expert, but it can say effectively the most likely thing to say about this is this. The most likely next word to appear is this. And when you boil that down, again, you don't always get the right answer, but you get the kind of most common answer. Now, when you look at it that way, it starts to become a little bit more clear how you can use it, right? Think about something like Excel. This is a use case we deploy all the time. We've all gotten a lot better at Excel because we don't necessarily have to know the arcana of all of these formulas, all of these different ways to do things. We can go to ChatGPT and interface just like we're talking with a human and say, I need to do X, Y, and Z. How would I do that in Excel? It's not specific, like insane subject matter expert knowledge to know how to do that. It's just putting it all together. It's synthesis of information. It's very good there. If we think about something like a sales email, right? Again, it doesn't have to be special necessarily. It has to exist, it has to be fine, and it has to get the point across. If we think about summarizing a status call with a client, it needs to be correct, but it's not, again, working on some really deep level of knowledge. It just has to be able to synthesize that information. And those are very, very strong use cases. The other side of that coin outside the guide rails is when you start talking about subject matter expertise, right? When we get into really deep information in pharma, in biotech, in high-tech manufacturing, in software, and then the ability to layer that onto a niche buyer, AI simply can't do that, right? That's too far. You end up, again, with this very average product meant for a very specific use case. So those guide rails and guardrails are so important.
And I think we're going to get into that a little bit more. I'm going to ask you a little bit about the guardrails and some of the traps that we could fall into. That was really good. I love how you say it's the average answer. Can you? I don't want to miss that point.
Yeah.
And so that's worth a pause and say, it's not the correct answer. It's the average answer.
Yeah. And what's so cool about the average answer really comes to play when you talk about SEO and content creation. Because when we think about SEO, the other end of that, right, what's ranking you is a machine. It's Google, right? It's effectively a giant AI at this point. It doesn't know what a subject matter expert knows. And if a subject matter expert in a niche industry creates content the way they know it, most people, and certainly Google, can't understand it. It's a very strong use case to bring ChatGPT or bring a large language model in for, FAQs, right? To run highly technical content through and say, give me a summary, and have both the highly technical subject matter content alongside this more, it's not dumbed down, but certainly more accessible content. Bringing the two of them together really allows Google to understand what you're talking about, allows a user to understand what you're talking about, and can certainly increase those rankings just by making the content that much more accessible and that much easier for somebody to get.
Yeah, excellent. That's really something. So I want to transition a little bit from what it can do to what you should use it for. If I'm in a B2B solution provider company, and I'm a senior marketer or just in the marketing team, how do I look at this? Is this part of my MarTech stack? Is this some, temporary thing that I'm going to kind of bolt onto my activities? How should I see this in that landscape of all the technology tools that I'm using?
Think of it like an intern, right? Think of it like a particularly bright intern, but still an intern. And would you give an intern, subject matter expert level content, right? Go write an engineering white paper. The answer is almost certainly no, right? Would you give an intern a business critical decision to make? The answer is almost certainly no. And I wouldn't do that with AI either. But would I ask an intern to give me some frequently asked questions about this subject, or summarize that, or figure out maybe an easier way to do this in Excel, or let's work with a little bit of Python here and see if we can streamline some workflows or create some JavaScript that is able to do a certain task within Airtable, right? Those types of tasks where there is relatively low stakes, but also the need to get something right at scale. Again, I've kind of described an intern there, right? They have to do a lot of work. It's not the highest level work, but it has to get done. AI is very good for that. So would I necessarily go to AI, throw in a prompt, get something out, publish it with my name on it and my picture next to it? I probably wouldn't, right? Would I use it to help me research a topic? Would I use it to give me a top line of something? Would I use it to summarize or synthesize something? Absolutely, right? So again, it's an intern, it's a helper, it's an aid. It is not a replacement for high level knowledge workers.
Great analogy or great example. It's an intern. It's an additional intern, really smart intern. That's great. So again, think about it. I'm a B2B solution provider. I'm in the marketing team. I'm thinking about, we want to use this. I probably already have some people in the team that are using it on their own, but I'm thinking of, do I bring in all my smart brains and start developing a strategy and, do a 1-day offsite, or do I just kind of turn people loose on this?
I would definitely err more toward a 1-day offsite, because the critical thing here is we're at a point where we don't really know where Gen AI tech is going. We don't know if there's a future for it, quite frankly. The energy concerns are very real, right? These models use unbelievable amounts of computing power and unbelievable amounts of energy. We don't know if we're going to be able to scale that or find a solution to do things more efficiently. We don't know how much, quote unquote, smarter these models will get. It's entirely possible they're basically at a plateau, right? The training data is almost exhausted. There's only so much out there because humans have only created so much. At a certain point, the models start learning from themselves. And does that cause, model collapse, as one of the terms of art? You can make a really good argument that it will. So I would be very careful about, to your point before, just turning people loose, because if this is baked in at a fundamental level where it can't be extracted from a business process, and these models effectively collapse, or they become prohibitively expensive, you might be in a lot of trouble. So I would be very careful to try to use almost a microservices architecture approach, where this is a spoke coming off the hub. It's a helper, it's an intern, it's additive, it's very useful. But if tomorrow OpenAI said, look, to have a single seat on this platform is $100,000, I'd be able to cut that and not lose all that much. Do I think that's going to happen? I don't. But at the same time, do I think this is going to progress the way some real evangelists are saying it's going to progress? I don't see a path there either. So a lot of caution, just like anything else. That is the future there, is the future not there? We don't really know what's coming down the pike. Make sure that, again, if you need to prune it, if you need to tone it down, or if you need to scale it up, that's possible, as opposed to saying today, this is my strategy for 2026, 2027, because we have absolutely no idea what's coming.
What a great pragmatism. I love that you laid that out, the context of that. It's a little bit of a fear, but in a more of a cautious approach to its use. So great. Thank you. Thank you for doing that. That's great. We're going to take a short break. I'm talking to Adam Smartschan. He is the Chief Strategy Officer at Altitude Marketing. We're talking generative AI and ChatGPT, and we're going to be right back. Welcome back to the Trailblazers. I'm speaking with Adam Smartschan. He is the Chief Strategy Officer at Altitude Marketing, and we're talking generative AI and ChatGPT. And if you missed the first part, go back. You're going to get a 101 ChatGPT explanation and how it can be used and how you should use it. And we're going to transition a little bit to, okay, so Adam, you kind of recommended, you don't want to just go into this blindly. Be a little cautious, do some planning, get your team together, the smartest brains, and talk a little bit about how you're going to roll this out. So when you do that, you had already mentioned a couple times some guardrails. So what do you recommend? What kind of guidance would you roll this out with? What kind of guardrails would you put in place?
Absolutely. Number one, and this is the most critical from a marketing perspective, is you can't have raw AI generated content made available without a human. It's very good and it always sounds human. It will also make things up. And there is just no way around that in the way that these models work, because again, they don't have a core base of knowledge. They have probability. And if that probability says I should make something up, it will go ahead and make it up. So am I okay with, for instance, chatbots that are completely based on an LLM just being live to the world? I'm really not, because I don't think that we can control them in the way that we want to control them. Am I okay with grabbing a few paragraphs for a blog post when I'm stuck and reading it over and making sure that anything in there is real? Absolutely, right? So having that human element on top of it, I think is hyper critical. Number two, like we talked about before, be careful about dependency, right? Are these models going to exist and work as well in 2 years as they do today? We don't know. Are they going to significantly progress? We don't know. I certainly have thoughts about that, but I don't think that we'll see the same level that we're seeing today in terms of where it went from 22 to 24, from 24 to 26. If you're basing core business processes on this always being available and this always being cheap, you might run into some real issues, right, in the future, because we can't guarantee either of those things. And then number three, it's always critical, especially when we're talking about sensitive information, trade secrets, and personal information, to know where it's going. So are we okay putting proprietary data into raw vanilla ChatGPT out on the web and saying, summarize this? I'd have a real problem with that, because we don't really know where that's going. This is being subsidized, right? These are incredibly cheap products right now. They're way cheaper than they should be. But where is the data landing, right? Who is in control of it? If we're just putting it out there into the cloud, into the effectively open web, we're not really sure. So I have some real privacy concerns unless we can create our own instances or have applications with very specific guardrails and guide rails around security and privacy. But all of this is, kind of standard fare, right? New tech adoption things. But the biggest one, though, is because these really feel like they're human, right? It feels like a friend. You want to be a little bit more open with it than maybe you should be, because at the end of the day, whatever you're putting in to ChatGPT, whatever you're putting into any of these models or applications is going somewhere. And you have to be sure that whatever you're putting out there in the wild, you're kind of okay with being public.
Yeah, great. You keep bringing up the human-like characteristics of ChatGPT, and I love how you state that, because it's a friend, but maybe not your best friend of 20 years. So I love that. I love that human face you put on it. So I'm sure you run into a lot of people who want to talk to you about this. They're either highly enamored with this thing and they're all in, or they're scared. I'm going to lose my job. Candidly, like, what do you tell them?
On both sides, be less scared and be less enamored. I mentioned before, but there are dramatic real world costs to this technology. Now, we don't notice it when we fire up, chat.openai.com on Chrome and type something in. It just, again, feels like a chatbot. The amount of computing, though, behind the scenes is extreme. When you look at something like Midjourney, which is image creation, it's about as much power in terms of energy consumption to create a single image as it is to charge an iPhone. Now, one or two, that's no big deal, right? We all plug our phones in at night. But when you scale that up to millions, it becomes a real potential issue. I don't have the exact numbers, of course, on what this costs, but the estimates are something like 30 cents per query is what it's costing OpenAI to run ChatGPT behind the scenes. That's incredibly expensive. Now, that's energy, right? And that's real world cost. There's also raw computing resources. There are only so many GPUs in the world. There are only so many server farms in the world, and we can't scale this infinitely. So are we at the peak of what we're able to do from an energy perspective and from a computing perspective? The answer might be yes. Likewise, from a training perspective, these models were trained on effectively everything, right? Imagine an artist comes out with an incredible first album, right? Say they're 25 years old. They have 25 years of experience going into that first album. Then they want to do number two. Now they're 27 years old. And they've been busy for the last 2 years touring. They've only added 2 years of life experience. And how many times is that second album a real disappointment, right? It happens all the time. What are these models going to train on to get better when they've already consumed basically everything? Well, the actuality is they're going to start training on their own stuff. And I've heard this described as Habsburg AI, which is just an absolutely wonderful way of putting it. AI is trained on AI with all its hallucinations and all its problems and all its regurgitations, and it potentially gets worse and worse and worse and worse over time. None of this says to me that this tech is going to become so good it can replace a human or think like a human. None of this says to me that the concept of AGI or artificial general intelligence is even close to becoming reality. We don't have the energy, we don't have the money, we don't have literally the GPUs, we don't have the training data. It's just not going to happen anytime soon. So what do we have? We have an intern that might become a little bit smarter, that really doesn't have a path, though, to becoming CEO or certainly taking over or turning into Skynet at any time in the near future. Now, conversely, if we get smart about how we use this, right? If we are realistic about where we can plug this in, synthesis, analysis, basic tasks performed at unbelievable scale versus a human being, it can really help. It can really grease the skids. Is it anything more than really good, assistance, though? I don't think that we're going to see that necessarily in our lifetimes, just because of again, the real world constraints on this.
Really, two really good points you bring up. One, it appears to be free, but it's not. There's a cost to this, and a pretty hefty business cost over time, also to empower how much energy it actually consumes. The second point The second point you make is is this the best it's going to be now, and then it's only going to get worse over time? Is that what you're saying?
That is a completely real possibility, right? Because have we maxed out the computing power? Have we maxed out the energy consumption? Have we maxed out the ability of these companies to get funded, right? How much of this is being done with venture dollars, with investment dollars, and those demand returns? And did a lot of this come to be when dollars were really cheap, right? When 0% interest rates were a thing? Absolutely. Is it going to be a lot harder on the next round when rates are at 6, 7% to go get that same investment, right? Are Google and Microsoft and Amazon going to continue effectively funding these with their cloud resources? I don't know if we can see that into the future. Are enterprises who, in many cases right now, are disappointed with the results they're getting because in many cases they lack guide rails or they just aren't realistic about what this can do, at some point, do they get sick of this and say, boy, I'm putting how many billions of dollars in and my real world output is, in many cases, negligible, right? So this doesn't scale forever, and it doesn't scale in a linear fashion. I think that it's entirely possible that we've consumed most of what we're going to consume, and everything else from here is incremental, and it becomes much more about smart use and smart deployment rather than these grandiose ideas of what this could be one day that just simply aren't supported by what we see.
Excellent insights. Just really, really, very insightful understanding of this. I'm going to shift gears again. I'm going to talk about something I don't often see, I don't hear about when generative AI comes up, but it's the ethical use of it. So, how do you approach the ethical issues around this?
There's a lot of those. The biggest one, and this really underpins every use to me, is the presentation of something that is inherently non-human as human. We trust people to an extent, right? If I tell you something, I would hope that you have some trust just because I'm a person, right? I'm theoretically going to be doing the right thing. You have some trust that what I'm saying is correct, or at least pointing you in the right direction. If it's my face and my name on something that I had nothing to do with, all of a sudden we're starting to erode that, right? And we're starting to just pick away at trust online. We're starting to pick away at potentially just trust in our corpus of knowledge as humans, because sometimes it's made up, right? Sometimes it's just not real. So always being clear with a user, with a visitor, with someone on the other end of the screen or someone on the other end of the phone, what is vetted by a human and what is not. A great example here is Wikipedia, right? Wikipedia has an absolutely tremendous set of editors, right? These are incredibly dedicated folks who are completely consumed with making that the best source of information they possibly can. Nothing of that if you were to take AI and let it go, right? That same level of credibility would theoretically be there because it's still Wikipedia, right? It still theoretically has this group of editors, but now we have this other thing that we can't really trust. So if we're not clear about it and it's not very obvious what is AI and what isn't, I think that we have a real problem in terms just of trust, even at a societal level.
I mean, it sounds like we have like multiple levels of plagiarism. AI is plagiarizing other
Right.
sources. We're plagiarizing by using
Yeah.
AI. Is that
Right.
what it boils down to?
Yeah, right. And is it plagiarism? Is it not? Is it presenting something that's not real as real? That becomes now a real issue with the image generators, right? There's obviously the completely egregious use of deepfake technology that we've heard about. Clearly, that's beyond any line. But then you get the smaller things, right? Presenting products in slightly better light. Where's the line here? Well, we've all seen the burger ads, right? The burgers always look delicious. They don't always look like that when they come out of the drive-through. Do we have a fundamentally different issue now that it's easier to create these images at scale, that anybody can jump in, give a prompt, and kick out that image with effectively no work? We might just have to pay more attention to that. But again, it's that presentation of something that is inherently non-human as human because it kind of feels like human. That becomes really gray, really fast. Then you hit the issue of presenting real people, right? We actually did a webinar a few weeks ago with the group SAMPS about this, whether it's okay to show a celebrity, living or dead, and then there's a difference there, show with your product, right? It's one thing, Matthew McConaughey holding whatever it is you sell, clearly an issue, right? It's not real. Albert Einstein holding whatever it is you sell, it's a whole different issue. But again, it all comes back to this understanding of what is real, what isn't real, who knows what's real, and who knows what isn't real. Because with this, again, we can make these things that are really good fakes, whether it's language, whether it's image, whether it's video. At a certain point, when there's too much fake out there, we lose trust in everything. And that's not something that we can afford right now.
Yeah, when we spoke earlier, you had a real, I'm not going to be able to say it as clearly as you did, but you had what, well, like a really simple rule, and it related to misrepresenting yourself. And you apply this rule to yourself as well as the team there.
Yeah, there always has to be human, right? And there always has to be a clear delineation and a clear call out. If something isn't done by a person or vetted by a person, you have to say it. You have to make very, very clear that this is, either AI input or this is 100% AI. And it's not just a little disclaimer at the bottom that says ChatGPT might make mistakes, because you're going to read right over that, right? It has to have citations. It has to be credible and real. An agency out of Sweden that works globally called Up There Everywhere. I saw them at a conference a few months ago. Their rule was very simple. It was always add human. And I happen to think that's a really good way to look at it, because once you've started to erode someone's trust, once you've started to give someone something that is just a little bit off or a little bit strange or a little bit inaccurate and your name is on it and you haven't really vetted it the way you should, how much of anything else that you give can I trust? So always adding human is important, and always being very, very clear about what comes from a robot and what doesn't. It doesn't mean it's less than necessarily, but it does mean that we're keeping those communication lines just a little bit smoother.
Yeah, great advice. That's really important. So if I am I using this, I'm a B2B solution provider, my marketing team, I've turned loose, I've got a plan, everybody's using it. Is there any way I can control what you're talking about? Is there anything I can do to actually de-risk that?
Yeah, absolutely. So on an enterprise level, it's all about workflow. It's just like anything else. It's about building those checks and balances in. Most enterprises are not going to let just anybody publish to the web or anybody publish to social media. Anybody put out video content, for instance. There's always going to be layers of approval in there. And I would argue that one of those layers of approval has to be around, is this done by a person? Was this done with AI? To what degree did that come in? And how was it checked? One useful tool here is originality.ai. There's a number of these. These are models that effectively work the opposite of an LLM, where an LLM is predicting what to put next and putting it there. Something like originality is predicting what an LLM would put there. What is the most likely next word? Well, 99% of the time it's the, right? And 99% of the time after that, it's a dog. And there's no way that a human can always pick the most likely next word. We make mistakes, we have idiosyncrasies, we have different ways of talking and writing about things. If everything there is always the exact right prediction, we know it was done by a robot. And that's a good way to not necessarily catch, but at least vet whether this is real content by a human, whether this is 100% AI, or whether it's a blend of the two. One great use case here is, cover letters, right? I like to run cover letters through originality. And is that me saying, no, right? This is AI, or this was AI assisted, I'm not going to hire you. The answer is absolutely not, right? You can certainly use these tools. They are here as resources. That said, is that something for us to look at and say, boy, is there honesty here, right? Is this real? Can I trust this? You do have to be a little bit careful about that, right? It's never yes or no, this person used it, therefore wrong. but it is, yes, is there honesty here? Are they being very clear about how that use was done, right? That's an entirely different question. And then you get to where, do you want to hire Adam, or do you want to hire Adam who knows how to use a robot to help be more Adam? The answer is probably the second, right? Because I'm almost inevitably going to be more productive. I'm almost inevitably thinking about my work product at a deeper level. I'm almost inevitably trying to make it appeal to more people. So someone who's very good at using these tools and very good at creating efficiency with these tools and very good at building them into workflows, I think is a highly, highly valuable employee versus someone who is a complete Luddite and says, that's absolutely not for me, versus someone who just hands everything over and says the robot's going to do it. So the blend, the synthesis of human and robot, I'm starting to get into Deus Ex video game territory here, but it's almost an augmentation, right? If you know how to use this and you know how to smartly deploy it, you can make yourself faster, bigger, better at whatever it is you do.
Yeah, really good. So TikTok just got some bad news. Maybe I don't know how they feel about it, but it may be a ban. Who knows how this is going to flush out? Do you see this growing so big and the problems being so significant that there's some level of oversight, whether it's a watchdog organization or the government? Is there a role for that as this grows?
I think there absolutely is. And to me, it's something we have to be really careful about. A lot of the watchdog language that we've heard, especially out of Silicon Valley, honestly is marketing, right? What's a really good way for me to show how powerful my thing is? Well, I'm going to seed some doubt that this might take over humanity. Right? I've created something really good and really powerful if it can eventually take over humanity. That's not going to happen. Right. But some of this, when we talk about, oh, geez, we have to worry about the worst case scenario, some of that is marketing. That said, do we have to be very careful on legal levels, right? Especially with image models where we're literally just pulling art, we're literally pulling photos, we're literally pulling work product that real people did and feeding it into these models and being able to replicate it. I think that we have to be very careful about that, because if we're not careful about that and we don't have oversight there, we're going to cause the whole thing to collapse. It's not difficult for an artist to effectively put junk code into their images that tells the LLM that this picture of a dog is really a picture of a cow, because I need to protect myself, right? It's like an animal that has quills on it, right? I'm protecting myself from a potential predator. So does it make a lot more sense to have oversight and legality around what can be pulled and what can be used and what can't? I would certainly much rather have that than something where artists and photographers and other content creators need to take it into their own hands. When we look at the language side, very similar, right? We clearly need rules around legal documents, right? There's been instances, fortunately very few, where lawyers have used this and it just made up precedent. We clearly need rules around regulators and regulatory understanding, right? What is working its way into bills, what is working its way into deep doctrinal things. That can't just come from a machine. It needs to have a human there as well. But in terms of, boy, let's stop this thing from becoming sentient and taking over the earth, that's not going to happen. We don't have enough anything that is going to happen. That's marketing, right? But in terms of how these consume training data, how they use training data, and what the output is used for, especially in sensitive areas, that's very clearly something where I could see regulators stepping in as long as they do it smartly.
Well, thanks for walking me back from my images of, predators, robotic predators roaming the earth and taking over things. So thanks. I'm going to sleep better tonight. But something that does trouble me is that a lot of the watchdog activity, to watchdog like activity that's going on is coming from the creators.
Yeah.
And it's just marketing.
Yeah. Yeah. Right. And honestly, it's very good marketing, but at the end of the day, that is something that folks in the rank and file can really understand. Right? We've all seen the Terminator movies, right? We've all, or for the most part, read or seen Dune, right? We all know where thinking machines could theoretically go. That is absolutely a strong marketing message because it's a very resonant message. It's something that we can easily glom onto and say, boy, that would be terrifying. The secondary thing, like I said before, was, and this thing that Sam Altman built is capable of that. Boy, oh boy, that's powerful. The reality, though, as I mentioned, is very different. Just what it would take to create true, again, AGI, artificial general intelligence, it just completely outstrips any level of resources that we have on this planet, from a hardware perspective, from a computing power perspective, from an energy perspective, from a money perspective. It's not going to happen when the current state of things, which is in some ways really incredible, it's effectively still a chatbot, right? It's a really good intern. And I don't see the leap between intern and God Emperor of Earth happening that easily.
Great answer. I love how you sum that up. So I'm going to ask you, this is always tricky. And in 5 years, I'm not going to come back and say, wait a minute, you said 5 years from now, what might this look like? What might the technology look like? But more importantly, what does our relationship with it look like?
There's one big dependency here. And the big dependency is the efficiency with which we can make these models run. If we can make these models run incredibly efficiently, I could see a case where most applications that we deal with have effectively no interface. Where in Photoshop, I'm not dealing most days with a big row of options down the side and 15 windows on the right, and I have to go and drag and click and do all that. It's much closer to a natural language interface where I can describe what I want and it happens, and I can start to switch it up and change it. Something very similar would happen in Excel, right? Where it's not about knowing and typing the formula. It's much more about being able to describe in natural language what you want to happen and have it happen. Will that happen across the board? As it currently stands, it's tough. It's tough to bake these in at a fundamental level because, again, I just worry about the downstream costs of that. Who is ultimately going to bear the cost for the computing power of having every Excel user interface in natural language and having every Excel formula not be somebody typing COUNTIF, but having someone say, well, how do I get this to happen and that go up to the cloud and that can do this over here and that come back here? That's very expensive. If we make this more efficient, then that can happen. That is, to my mind, really the best case scenario, where we're talking about applications going from code to low code to no interface. The same thing would be true in this case of language creation, where I would be able to, kick out the sales email that we talked about before, that I would be able to get a summary of something, that I would be able to get frequently asked questions about something, that I would be able to get the bones or the outline of a blog post very simply and very easily without having to deal with an arcane interface. I think that's completely reasonable. Will we get to the point of it being indistinguishable from human work product? I find that very hard to believe because, again, I think that we're going to hit the point of just training saturation, that there's just nothing more for them to learn from. The other side here, though, is use, and how are we going to see this used? I think in the next year or two, there's going to be a dramatic drop-off on enterprise adoption. I don't think it's going to be quite as steep as what you saw with blockchain and crypto, because there is really something here. But everybody who bought in, assuming this indeterminate future that was going to be incredible, I think it's going to fall off to some level. I think you're going to see very specific baked-in cases. Again, that best case scenario being applications at scale moving away from traditional interfaces. I think the more realistic, if we assume the computing power stays about the same as it is, little bits and pieces of that, maybe a little more than it is in Photoshop right now, slightly more realistic text creation, slightly more realistic photo creation, but being utilized kind of the way like forms on a website are now, right? It's part of a greater whole. There's certainly a lot that we can do with it. There's a lot of value that we can get from it. It can be a force multiplier, but not to the extent where I can type in a few words and get a whole website, right? That's just not going to happen. It's a very long answer to a very simple question. But again, to my mind, right, I want to see interfaces start to move their way in natural language. I think that is our best case scenario here. None of this involves robots. None of this involves Skynet. None of this involves smart replacement of content creators. Right? We're not going to be at a point where every writer in the world can be replaced with AI, because we're just not there. Right? AI cannot have a new idea, and generative AI as it currently stands will never have a new idea. It would take something entirely different to have a new idea. We still need people, right? Might we need a few fewer people? Yeah, that's entirely possible, right? But we do need people making sure that the models are giving good information, making sure that the models are giving useful information, and using what the models give to create whatever the next generation of user experiences and customer experiences are.
Yeah, really. So that sounds pretty positive. I love how you describe that. One of the limiting factors in the outcomes we're trying to achieve with technology is always the user interface. It's the slowest part of that relationship. We're still typing on our laptop computers. We can speak into our smartphones and do some search, but that doesn't always go well. But it seems, if I'm hearing you right, throughout our discussion here, a lot of this is about making that human technology relationship, that user experience, better.
Yeah, that's absolutely the case. And honestly, that is the biggest revolution with ChatGPT. That's the biggest change we've seen since November 22. It's the ability of a computer not just to generate content, but to understand content, to understand what you're asking for and give you a realistic, useful outcome. It's almost the inverse of the way most folks think about this, but the natural language processing capabilities are so much better than they used to be. It's opened up completely new ways of interacting with software solutions, with applications, and really with the world around us. It could completely revolutionize the way things like voice assistants work, right? You mentioned Alexa. It could completely revolutionize the way car infotainment works, right? There's very mediocre, in most cases, use of voice technology there. It's all this really, really strict, this command activates that to the exact word, right? I remember in my Volvo, it wasn't heated seats, it was seat heat. If you said heated seats, it wouldn't do anything. Seat heat on, right, would turn that on. If we start to bake better natural language processing in, could you say, turn the heated seats on, it would know what you're asking for? It could. And that's a really big deal, because now we started interacting with the world around us, which involves technology, just in the way we interact with everything else. That starts to become really positive. And it's not just about writing a blog post, but it's about making small things simpler. It's about democratizing technology. And when you democratize technology, you democratize innovation, because you've started to pull down walls that keep people from moving to the next step because they don't have technical skills. This could help us bridge the gap for anybody to do a lot more things than they used to be capable of. The example I used before was Excel, right? We've all, as a society, gotten a lot better at Excel, even if we don't know it, because we have ChatGPT there, and all we have to do is go describe what we want, and it's probably going to understand us at a decent level, and it's probably going to get a decent response. Might not be the exact cleanest formula, it might not be the exact cleanest backend, but we're going to be able to get there. And with that, what can we do? Well, you don't need to know the specific language anymore. You don't, in many cases, need the exact technical skill anymore. You can just talk and dream and imagine, and this is going to help you get there. And if there's a best case scenario, I really think that's the best case scenario.
That's excellent. We would welcome that, right?
Yeah.
What a world you're describing would be really welcoming. That's wonderful. So the danger of me talking to somebody about something I know nothing about is that I miss questions. So we'll wrap this up with: is there something else you'd want to say about this? Something that I'm missing? Something I didn't ask about?
You touch on most of the really important topics, and I think it bears repeating that the threats here are not necessarily the threats we immediately think of, right? It's very easy to go Skynet. I don't think, and I do not see a path to where that is a realistic problem, because it just requires so much more in the way of resources than we have on the planet. The real threat here is if we start to bake in tech at fundamental levels that can break, that will evolve in unnatural and unpredictable ways. If we assume that what we went through from 22 to 24 is going to be the same path as 24 to 26, and we start to plan on that and bake it in where it can't be extracted, we could be either disappointed, or we could have, honestly, real problems. Because if we hit the point of model collapse, right, if we hit the point where these LLMs are actually less capable in 2 years than they are now, which is a very realistic possibility, and we can't pull it out of our systems, or we've gone and fired half of our writers and replaced them with AI that stops working, we've really kind of made an issue for ourselves, right? So baking this at around the periphery, making sure that if there's something that we need from it, we've pulled it off, we have our own private version, it's secure, and it's not going to fail, that's hypercritical. It's not going to be the robots that get us here, right? What it's going to be is this little thing that you've built other things on that all of a sudden collapses, and who knows what goes with it, because it's become a critical part of your infrastructure.
Yeah, excellent. Thank you very much. So I've been speaking with Adam Smartschan. He is the Chief Strategy Officer at Altitude Marketing. Altitude Marketing, there are a lot of marketing organizations out there, agencies that serve customers. Altitude really is good at taking the time. They're going to gain a deep understanding of their customers, a deep understanding of the industry. They turn that into really, really good, sustainable, strategic plans. They're great at that. Adam, how can people contact you?
Absolutely. The easiest way is our website. It's altitudemarketing.com. You'll find everything that you need there. Of course, on the AI front, but across the industries that we work in, life science is a great one for us. That is our core client base. We absolutely love working in that space because it's hard. We like the hard stuff, but manufacturers, software providers, they're going to find a home with us as well. So altitudemarketing.com is your best source, and we'd love to hear from you.
Great. Adam, thank you very much for joining us today. Just a great interview. I really love this topic now. You've helped me take the blinders off a bit, and I hope our listeners as well. And I hope you'll come back for another Trailblazer interview sometime.
Thank you so much, Perry.